Thanks, Brian.
Hi, everybody. I'm Allison Williams, the Library Services Coordinator for the Copper Queen Library, and I am so pleased to introduce Brian Robinson, the Health Educator for Chronic Diseases at Cochise County Health and Social Services Department. Welcome, Brian.
Hey, thanks very much. This is one of a couple of presentations that I've been hitting the road with, the second of which may be getting booked soon with the library, and that would be boosting brain health. So there's a little pre-commercial, I guess, if you will, for the next
Absolutely.
one.
And we
Excellent.
we we will
Uh,
book that, and I'm very excited about that one as well.
Cool. Today, of course, we're dealing with kind of the epicenter measure, perhaps, of health, and that is the heart and this hypertension counteroffensive. And we're going to go ahead and jump right in. We're going to look at the general landscape of health and a snapshot of today. And there's a trend that clearly isn't very good. So what we're going to examine is, how did we get here? What are the multiple factors that have adversely affected public health? And we'll look at some graphs in a linear capacity over several decades that are quite stunning. There is opportunity in this, though, for an individual, how to kind of escape that particular trap. We're going to look at outlier communities, these communities that have uniquely healthy populations that just thrive. And we'll look at that from a few different lenses: lifestyle, environmental factors, which mainly I mean food by that, and also genetics. And I want to clarify a little bit on genetics there. Supposing everyone on a street eats the same general food, and those two households over there, they're having more hypertension from that food. Those families over there, maybe type 2 diabetes. So there's a genetic range of response in a family genetic line. But the question is the catalyst mandatory? Do you have to be subjected to things that make you sick? And we're going to reflect on that back with those outlier communities that don't have those issues. We're going to have a blood pressure deep dive in this presentation, where we'll look at the relevance of hypertension being the canary in the coal mine, and look at three primary factors: the heart muscle, the blood itself, and the vascular passageways, and positive and negative effects, positive and negative things, rather, on those three factors. And we're going to look at some psychological angles, some ways that we can build better habits and start to mechanize a system to help us thrive, which is a real important part of it when it boils down to it, because knowledge doesn't do anything just by itself. Got to get it moving. This is a thing that is real: food bias. We overrate our knowledge of health, our knowledge of nutrition and whatnot. And this has been proven statistically numerous times. And simultaneously, people underrate health threats to them. And it's a rather dangerous combination. I can certainly relate to a food bias issue because I think I had a lot more of it before. And I've gone on a journey where my blood pressure went down very, very dramatically, as did my body weight, by around 80 pounds or so. And it got me very interested in this field when I started to experience firsthand the potential for how someone can turn things around. You don't have to take the medication because you don't have to eat that same food, for example. Now, I'm not a doctor or a nutritionist. I've got a background in science outreach. I'm the chronic disease educator for the county. Think of me as more of a health reporter. I will get pretty excited about some of the results in some of the studies that I feature here. If someone takes action on these, that would be of their own volition. And wherever there are medication interplays of concern, I'm going to vocalize those to the best of my knowledge and ability as we go. But you will take action of your own volition. Now, I want to share this quick hack, if you will. This is really cool, actually. Isometric hand exercises are very, very effective in lowering blood pressure. You can see in this 10-week trial here, 123 over 82 went down to 113 over 76 in a matter of 10 weeks, which is pretty impressive. And it's just a matter of a few minutes of these hand grips. This kind here with that coil, the old school kind, it's a little bit too hard to hold, because what you want to do is you want to hold for 2 minutes on each hand and rotate through that 3 times total, so 6 total sets, while you're on the couch, while you've got Netflix going or what have you. This kind in that picture, these are all over the internet for $7, and it's got this little dial at the front, and you can kind of depotentiate the spring and make it easy for you to hold at about that 1/3 strength, 1/3 of your total power for a couple minutes. That's how they did this study. 3 times on each side, 12 total minutes, those results. That's pretty cool. Also going to share in this presentation the ingredient that is in the most popular candies in the world that is actually fantastic for your heart health, which sounds like I'm trying to trick you. I'm not. When we get to that, okay, that makes sense. It will make sense, and it is absolutely true, and we'll get there in a bit. Now let's look at the landscape a bit here. Wow, look at these numbers. 6 in 10 adults, that is 18 and over, have one of these chronic diseases listed at the bottom there: cancer or heart disease, hypertension, Alzheimer's, or some form of dementia. And 2 of 3 that suffer from a chronic disease have at least 2 chronic diseases. And this just doesn't match up with the rest of human history when you go even half century by half century, for example. Here is a fairly recent, and it's relatively static, even in this COVID era. COVID keeps on coming in at about number 3 as causes of death, and you see nearly 700,000 cases of death from heart disease annually. And of course, when we talk about something as bleak and morbid as that, we'll throw in a couple of kitties and a couple puppies in there, just kind of lighten it up just for a moment, and then back to the charts. Now, look at this over time. This is essentially the 20th century eking into the 21st century here. This chart goes back to 1900 and is headed into our century here. Look at that immense ramp up. That slight tail down is not an improvement in the state of health. It's a slight improvement in emergency medicine, like battlefield medicine, for example. So that's not going well. Here are total chronic diseases, that last one being heart disease. Here are total chronic diseases from 1935 to the near present, 2020. And you see 7.5 up to that 60% number in the last couple of years, an 8 times rise in total chronic diseases of adults in our country, which is profound, and I find profoundly concerning. What happened? How could this elevate what in fact is very quickly? That's almost a joke. Are humans changing? You know, modern anatomical human, or our genetic classification, is about a 50,000 to maybe as much as 300,000 year proposition. So no, it's not us in a genealogical sense. So what changed? The food. The food certainly changed. We devised ways through both world wars, and particularly it was mechanized in the Second World War, to package enough food to send to hundreds of thousands or more soldiers dug into foxholes in multiple continents at the same time. We got really good at it. Fortunately, peace broke out, and the industries that did this needed to find new customers. And it wasn't that hard. Here's a picture of some really cool classic cars, actually, in the 1950s. But of course, the grocery stores, the supermarkets that we know today. Here's kind of the genesis phase of that, where they did find a way to package food and sell it like that in larger operations than your local general store, for example. And so all of a sudden, you have the stuff on the left that existed in nature naturally as food, reconfigured into these things on the right side of the screen, and let's just say augmented with some added ingredients, and that would accelerate that concept as we go decade by decade. And here we are, off to the races, filling up a shopping cart of the prepackaged stuff. There are some bananas in that cart there, you see, but I think they're getting squished and they're going to be all destroyed by the time she gets them home. Here's a couple offerings from the early 50s, 54 and 53 respectfully, and there's not much debate as far as nutritional content here. And getting into the 80s, you've got a new job offered. It is the food scientist. And I was excited when I learned that that happened, thinking that it might be something that was good for us. And that's not really the case. The food scientists would be hired to design foods that would ping dopaminergic cycles, that would be crispy on the outside, creamy on the inside. And oh, people would get really excited for those because they would be a supernormal stimulus, which is a stimulus that is designed to over-ping that center. The original stimulus, it far exceeds the level that that circuit would normally handle and overactivates it. And we feel mysteriously drawn to the stimulus. And I would say mysterious until someone points out that it's there. And then we can start to perhaps unravel that we're in some sort of trap and maybe start to back out and find our way out of that. But we need to know what these things are, of course. And here are some examples of supernormal stimuli. And those would be sugar on the upper far left, which is derived from a 15 or 20 foot tall sugar cane, and a complex process turns it into that. When you smash a vegetable and remove all the fiber and most of the nutrition, you're left with the oil, the center shot there. And then, of course, added salt. Sodium is absolutely required for life, basically in the amount that the earth would provide in a natural habituated cycle of life. Of course, added salt is a different story. And what we actually see in the food products around us is mathematically obtuse and certainly has drastic ramifications to the human biome. So these folks on the left here, early agricultural folks, 10,000, 15,000 years ago, they would go around a berry tree like that and find the side that had the most nutrient-dense berries. The amygdala is part of this brain circuit that would say, oh, that's got the most nutrition value, the most energy value in a feast or famine motif that has been the bulk of the history of time on this planet. So if that individual goes into a cheesecake factory and eats that food, the type of pinging through the brain that that would give, it would tell them, oh, they need to load up on that. But their brain isn't different than our brain. Our brain, those circuits haven't changed just because the food has changed over maybe some 75 years. So we're as vulnerable in a restaurant like that as them. And just taking a quick peek at what they do to us in restaurants, if you will, some of these numbers are just absolutely staggering. In 20 minutes, you'll get more than 72 hours worth of sodium at that one sitting. The type of fat and saturated fat in this one menu offering, not to mention more than a day's worth of calories in one sitting. And that is completely common as an example. So another thing that changed is the medicine. After the food changed, they tried to chase it down, and of course that's treating symptoms. So we want to look at that medicine for a moment and talk about what are the effects of blood pressure. And let's look at that numerical example, 141/83, for example. Now, at that moment that reading is taken off of an individual's arm, that blood pressure needs to be that number, which is of course high, a little high. It needs to be that number to oxygenate and deliver nutrients to all the cells of the body, because there is a circulatory inefficiency. It needs to be that high to do its job. It's not a good scenario, but there is actually a reason for it, and it's the inefficiency. So when your body is on these blood pressure meds long term, the filtering organs are looking for they're looking for foreign chemicals. And that's what any medication that ever filed and received a patent is. It's a foreign chemical. And the body tries to get rid of those, which is why you need to keep taking the medicine for months or years or what have you, because the body will rid itself of the medicine. So you're really putting a hurting on the liver and the kidneys and what could turn into decades. But we feel as though we have a shield that protects us against some adverse outcomes when we're on this medication. But in truth, some metadata sets reveal that 75 to 85% of the strokes and heart attacks still happen. And I've never seen any statistical data set that even suggests that the medication reduces anywhere near half of those events. But we sure are spending on medication over these last 60-ish years in this particular graph, up to about $1,000 annually. Now, that is an average of all adults. So if you take the 18 and 19-year-olds who largely aren't on meds yet, then if there's a few of those, it means someone's spending $5,000, $10,000. We know this. Going back in time, that was $9 in 1960, maybe inflation adjusted to 90, but we're more than 10x in our average spending on pharmaceuticals over the last 60 years or so. So that must be working, because we're really doubling down and then some on the spending. But no, there is the chart of chronic diseases from 1935 to nearly the present, and it's not affecting that in any way positively whatsoever. So to review this timeline, one thing changed the food. Second thing changed the medicine. That didn't work. It's not helping. So can we go back and change the first thing? And if I had a magic wand to make everyone's food healthy, wow, we would just go right at it. But the individual can do this. The individual can do this with a better understanding of their surrounding and some new systems. So I think there's immense and exciting opportunity in that. Let's double check. How important is food and nutrition with regard to health and chronic diseases? Well, the American Heart Association says a healthy diet and lifestyle are the keys to preventing cardiovascular disease. The CDC says people with healthy eating patterns live longer and are at lower risk for serious health problems such as heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and obesity. And the National Kidney Foundation says good nutrition is the key to good mental and physical health. Cleveland Clinic, more than 2/3 of heart disease-related deaths worldwide can be linked to food choices. That's a number that looks low from most of the data that I've seen. And the director of Yale University's Prevention Center, Dr. Katz, says diet is the single most important predictor of health. So what can we do? There's a time machine for you from the movie Back to the Future. If you want to build yourself a flux capacitor, you could go back to before this problem came into fruition, which is not particularly realistic. You could look at your passport situation and visit or stay at one of these locations on Earth, which are the blue zones. Of course, one of them is in California, and that would be a mere road trip. This might not be realistic to go into one of those other populations and say goodbye to everyone. However, in the lower right corner, actually building your radar as you install facts about the surrounding and where the trap is set to catch you, that can be extremely effective to understand what your options are kind of in real time. Plan ahead a little bit when it comes to food and whatnot. So certainly I could advocate that, but we're going to look at those outlier communities from the blue zones a little more closely to see what we can implement. What did they do? What did they continue to do so well that results in their vitality? Here are some of their results. 10 times more 100-year-olds in Sardinia, Italy, 7 times more likely to be a centenarian in Costa Rica. 90-year-olds, 1 in 3 people become 90 in Icaria, Greece, and so on. And then you've got the intentional community, so to speak, in Loma Linda, California, Seventh-day Adventists, I believe, and they live 10 years longer than other Californians. So this is worth taking note of, that life goes well, they stay healthy and live long. Here is the Venn diagram of the general attributes of 3 of these blue zones. And certainly you want to pay attention to the middle, the things they all share. And I always have to start by pointing out legumes, beans, chickpeas, absolutely fantastic for you in every study that I've ever seen. As simply good for you as lowering your pulse in the matter of a couple days, about a half cup of red kidney beans, for example. Fantastic. So this is something to Google for yourself and keep on your screensaver on your phone or something. Like, these ideas are so exceptionally valuable. And we're going to look at the dietary, the division of caloric intake for the Loma Linda group in particular. And what I find striking here versus how the rest of Americans eat, if you will, is 60% of their caloric load is from vegetables and fruits, which by and large, particularly vegetables, are calorically low. So they're eating a lot, and it certainly shows in the results. I was surprised at how much dairy they were, so to speak, getting away with. And I think it's because oftentimes some of the oxidative stress, some of the damage that certain food groups can do, they have so much in the other category that it actually does envelope those effects to a degree. When you're going to have your meat and dairy for the week, for example, when you're having other things like grapes or apples in the same sitting, they actually donate electrons to this mix and help balance and cut off at the pass the type of damage that the oxidative foods would be about to perpetrate. This has been imported to the U.S. In Minnesota. They did an experiment in a smaller town of, I think they had about 19,000 people sign up for this actually. And in 1 year, they were able to seemingly, by estimate, gain about 3 years of life expectancy, which is pretty cool. Now, here's something that pertains to this topic that I find fascinating. This is a statistical set from way back in 1929 by a Dr. Donaldson, who was stationed in Kenya for 2 years. And what we've got here is a comparison of the blood pressure readings via age group in two populations, the European and American population and the African population. Now, even before the vast changes in our food supply, because this chart, this is from 1929, you can still see the rise decade to decade of blood pressure in America and Europe. Simultaneously, blood pressure in individuals where they don't have a lot of the additives in their food at this point in time, blood pressure is going down from normal, if you will, in the late teens, 120/80, down to 106/67 when you're over 60. And a case can be made, or rather is made, by this statistical set, as we'll look at other genetic possible variables. The case is made that that's natural, as opposed to what we see and can measure with data in what has become truly an unnatural environment, an abnormally habituated environment in the West. So in 2 years, Dr. Donaldson saw 1,800 patients, all people checking into a hospital for care. And there were no cases of high blood pressure, 0 in 1,800 people, because it really just isn't a thing when the food hasn't been distorted. But let's double check. But is there actually their genetics, that population genetically? Well, African Americans, for example, have some of the highest chronic diseases rates, including with hypertension and heart disease. There's an interesting data point with American women versus Japanese women. And that is, American women have 13 times the level of breast cancer that Japanese women do. And when Japanese women move to the West, within 5 years to 10 years, they incur the same frequency of breast cancer as the rest of the population. When they change their food, their outcome changes. And in Hawaii, an observational or anecdotal, really, account, Dr. John McDougall of Forks Over Knives started a practice in the 80s, and he saw about 4 generations in one family as patients at the same time. And the elders were resisting the encroachment of the new ways. And the elders, the great-grandparents in that family tree, were very healthy and still striding around at their high school weight in their 75 or 80th year or what have you. And as you get down 4 generations to the 22-year-olds, they were getting very unhealthy, very young. And it's because of how much they were willing to adopt the change that was available to them via commerce. So we're going to look at another Forks Over Knives contributor here, Caldwell Esselstyn, a cardiologist and a prominent one from the Cleveland Clinic, because they've shown for multiple years a disease that can treat coronary artery disease. I'm sorry, a diet that can treat that and actually reverse. And they have some excellent data sets to show. This was their first graduating class, if you will, from 24 years ago. And they had nearly 200 patients, 198 folks in this. And they call them every year. Are you still doing the diet? The non-adherent patients suffered in this time period of 24 years, 62% event rate. And those were heart attacks, and many of them fatal. In that 24 years, fortunately, the majority of people were adherent. 0.6, there was one cardiac event and that person lived. Makes a pretty strong case, and they repeated this year after year. It makes a strong case that the diet can protect someone who already has significant cardiovascular problems. Here's the diet: whole grains, legumes, chickpeas, beans, lentils, other vegetables and fruits. They would reassure patients that that would be plenty of protein, and it is. They would get them a B12 supplement, which is, by the way, a top 3 nutrient deficiency in all diet types, not just necessary for people who are more plant-based. And they'd also supplement with flax meal, which we'll see a little bit later in this presentation as well, because it is extremely valuable as a supplement to this and really any diet. And you might look at that list, I'm going to go back to that for a second and say, well, okay, well, that's all well and good, but that's not the stuff that I like. And then what? Like, can you get yourself to make those kind of changes? Well, here's the good news from Dr. Neil Bernard, who started the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. This is an excellent book from around 20 years ago, I believe, Breaking the Food Seduction. And I'll fill in the blank for you, costing Dr. Bernard $20, saving you 5-6 hours. Your brain and taste buds want what you recently had. And this starts to change in about 72 hours. In about 3 days, you'll start to like the foods you're trying to like, which is just an immense opportunity. And I didn't know this when I started my own journey of becoming healthy and saving myself, if you will. I consider myself a self-rescue, as bad as it was getting. But this made perfect sense to me after the fact, because I love the foods I eat now, and none of the foods I eat now were the foods I ate then, and vice versa. I would have never thought that these are the things I'd think of when I'm hungry. We are proposing kind of a longer classroom version of this, where we work with some cardiologists, patients, and whatnot, and we'll get into a label reading. Label reading is likely to be kind of a spin-off course that we're going to do as well. But we just wanted to hit quickly on the things that we would talk about, the what to watch for. And those are your fats and your types of fats, particularly the saturated fat that you want to low cap on that numerical value of only up to 13 or so. And you can go way beyond that in a single serving of something. And you could find out on the label or on the restaurant website if in fact you're about to do that. Hopefully cut that off at the pass. Carbohydrate wise, we're primarily concerned with added sugars. And people ask me what the right number of added sugar is. And I say, well, the best number is 0. It's hard to kind of attain a diet like that in the Western world, but it is possible, and the lower you can get that number, the better. And then sodium, your American Heart Association guidance is 2,300 as a daily cap, but heart healthy is 1,500. So something to keep in mind there. And low sodium or no salt added packages certainly could be your friend in that regard. In the extended classroom version that is not this presentation, we get a little bit more into selecting a battery operated cuff for home and learning how to operate it, and going through checklists like this so that you can have reliable results. And it's pretty important, I think, to have results from home. You could have an afternoon appointment scheduled at the doctor's office, and in a circadian rhythm sense, your blood pressure goes up through the midday into the afternoon. And if you're one of many, you have something called white coat syndrome, where you're just nervous about being there, having it taken by the doctors or nurses or what have you, and you'll get really an unrealistic representation of what your blood pressure is. And you may want to add to that data on you. You may want to bring in your journal and say, well, I understand you just took that reading, but you can test my cough. I brought it with me, and it says this in the morning, and that's valuable to know. All right, we're going to take our deep dive and understand the certain major contributing factors to hypertension, to high blood pressure, and how we can avoid them, therefore. And we'll look at this from three perspectives: the heart muscle, the blood, and the vascular passageways. And we'll start with the heart, and we'll start with this analogy where we're saying these two vehicles are two hearts, and we're going to compare their performance. We're going to look at their attributes and compare their performance. Microsoft didn't think that was a very good slide. Clearly, you can see there that they said, no, don't even try that. But there it was anyways. So here's our two contestants. We've got a 13-year-old little four-door sedan with a small engine, 4-cylinder. Hasn't been taken care of, though. It's not well maintained. It's got a dirty air filter, and they don't do the oil changes. And the competitor is a 30-year-old truck with a bigger engine, big V8 with a 5.7, but this is well maintained. It's got fresh spark plugs, it's got STP gas treatment. Now, how would these two perform on this prospective all-day drive through the mountains, pulling up the hills for 5 hours or what have you? Well, contestant number one, the small engine that's not maintained, is really revving up on the red line here for the whole thing. And this is rather analogous to the fact that the most heart attacks in our country happen on Christmas, Thanksgiving, and New Year's Day, when we have even more harmful food than we normally do. Because we're revving at that high 5,400 RPMs like that picture, and then we peg it. And some people, that does not turn out well for. The truck with the bigger engine, low stress, low pressure, the more powerful the engine, it more easily pushes a similar weight, and the RPM stay low, under 2,000, barely even knows it's working. The good news here is you can actually build a better engine slowly, carefully, not can't get off to the races on this, but I want to explain the mechanism here, how the heart actually improves. When there's new catalyst, a bit more activity, more exercise, the stroke volume, the amount of blood you pump per beat of your heart, will increase as the ventricles, the lower bodies of the heart, actually come under load and stretch a little bit. And particularly with the left ventricle, it's going to be capable of more volume per stroke. And it raises stroke volume, and it can increase efficiency pretty significantly. Don't jump into stuff like this carelessly, I would say. That's why I put this on the screen, the physical activity readiness quiz, often used by personal trainers and whatnot, but you'll go down the list. Anyone can search for this and take it themselves. And if you answer any yeses, you should make a call before you prescribe yourself any exercise routine. But in general, and with consideration to that, slow, steady progress. Don't bite off too much. Schedule increments. If the first day is 100-foot walk down the driveway into the mailbox, because for some people with chronic disease, with hypertension and whatnot, that's going to represent a big effort. Just add 100 feet. And if you do that daily, in 2 weeks, you're going a quarter mile, and that's a totally different animal. Now, we're going to look at the blood and ask the question, how's your blood? Which sounds like a funny question, but there's a range of quality with blood. We think of it as a product with a type and a label on it and whatnot, but there's a lot that goes into how good an individual's blood is in any static moment. Blood is the fluid component of the cardiovascular system that links the internal environment of the body to the external environment by transporting materials between the two environments. Really cool definition from the American Council on Exercises that I think gets people thinking. We're going to look at the components quick. Red blood cells for oxygenation, white blood cells carry out immune function. Platelets largely control viscosity, are in charge of clotting, and will bear very large on general blood flow. And then the plasma is about half of our total blood volume, and it's mostly water. It carries everything else around the system. Now, the red blood cells, for example, are replaced about every 4 months or so. Not all of them at once. As one kind of goes into the end of its well-being, it's going to be recycled for its raw materials and whatnot. But red blood cells are replaced. There's 25 to 30 trillion of them on average. So it's an ongoing process. But how are they replaced? But they're made in bone marrow, and then they're brought out and released into the bloodstream. But they're made from something. And what if they're made from Little Debbie's chocolate cupcakes, for example? You know, that's kind of a quintessential "you are what you eat," and that wouldn't probably make your best red blood cell. So what should we eat? How about these richly colored, micronutrient dense foods that come right out of the earth, the place that we're from? These phytochemicals help charge up proteins like the hemoglobin inside the red blood cells that help with oxygenation. And when that's working better, the system can relax a little bit now. And certainly that's what we want. Increasing efficiency decreases demand and stress on the system, lowering pressure. And number one for oxygenating is dark red kidney beans, low sodium. You want to get that 140 milligrams of sodium or less. And this is one, many beans are very good for this, but it so happens to be dark red kidney beans are the best at charging up the hemoglobin. So each one can carry 4 oxygen molecules and maximize how the blood can do its job. Also, berries are really good. Strawberries, blueberries, blackberries. Here I do put the organic label on the screen. This is something I'm picky about. When you've got these kind of open membrane foods like berries, apples, greens, they really absorb pesticides and herbicides from the conventional farming methods. I'll buy normal and not organic with my bananas and oranges and whatnot, but things that I know actually soak in pesticides and herbicides, I'll skip those for an extra 10, 15% out of my wallet and make sure I'm getting just phytochemicals that I want to aid my health and not tiny little doses of poison at the same time. I think that's a valuable warning. Now, on the blood platelets end of things that are, again, they're largely responsible for how viscous, how our blood acts in its circulatory function. What we can induce is something called antiplatelet activity, and garlic is good at that. It helps make the blood much more slippery. And here's a really cool study that showed exceptional results. Let me see, 142. Unfortunately, my screen blocks some of that. You can see the numbers on there. Pretty drastic reductions in blood pressure. And that's over 10 days. The hand grip exercise was very valid, and that was 10 weeks. With a combination of garlic and vitamin C. Now, how much garlic? Kind of a lot. They used a pill version of it here, but the amount of garlic that you can actually have, say varying in adults between 100 and 300 pounds of body weight, is about 4 to 10 cloves of garlic. So in this study, the dosage of garlic is significant, and also is paired with vitamin C, 2 grams. You can only absorb about 500 milligrams of vitamin C in one sitting, call it, in one stomachful, but you could spread that out to 3 or 4 doses. And synergistically, the vitamin C along with the garlic is extremely effective. And I do have to forewarn, this is not for anyone who's treating hypertension or anything else with blood thinners. You have to be very careful of that. If you have checking your current medication, now that doesn't mean you have to avoid garlic at culinary levels, but what we're talking about in that study is pretty significant dosages. So just bear that in mind if you're on any blood thinners and you want to double check a hypertension regimen of medications against garlic and see if there's a conflict there. Quickly on the white blood cells and how they benefit from array of vegetables and fruits, well, you're upping your immune system. And not to get into the weeds about this, but when you're actually removing some of the catalysts of inflammation, because you're replacing inflammatory foods with anti-inflammatory foods and adding antioxidant capacity to the system, well, secondary effect of having a better immune system, as accomplished by those means, is a reduction in pressure as well. And here are the most potent anti-inflammatories actually that you can find that happen to be made by the earth: rosemary, ginger, turmeric, and clove. These are all more potent and more effective than, say, an aspirin and those types of anti-inflammatory medications. Ginger and turmeric, again, check with your current lineup of medications. Check with your doctor on particularly ginger and turmeric for any possible interactions. And rosemary can actually be sedative at about a 10x culinary dose. And maybe you're going for that. Just be aware that if you really up the rosemary, for example, you get sleepy. Salt, something we need to look for. This is one of the first things that we're going to be talked to about at the doctor's office when we find out we have hypertension. It volumizes blood plasma, and as a snapshot of how relevant this is when it comes to deaths attributable to diet, you see high sodium is on the top of the chart, even higher than deficiencies such as low in whole grains, low in fruits and whatnot. Getting too much salt, getting too much sodium is really easy to do, and frankly, most people do. Here's how this is a problem mechanistically. These little blue dots, the ionic compound sodium, they want to repel one another, like negative magnets will want to get away from one another. And when you introduce more of these ionic compounds, sodium, into a certain space, they need more water. They will leach in water from interstitial fluids around the vascularity to try to make that pool bigger and get more space. So they're bringing in water. They're blowing up the vascularity like that water balloon and pressurizing the system. Simultaneously, sodium actually has the effect of paralyzing the endothelial, that inner layer of your veins and arteries that would otherwise be more capable of expenditure, of vasodilation, but it can't, as the effect of the sodium takes hold. So it's kind of a double whammy, and it's a bad one. So we'll want to check these labels here. This is the normal tomato soup, 480 milligrams per serving, and you might have more than a serving. There's 2.5 servings in the little can. The low sodium version of that is a 75% reduction, and it would say, like, you know, something like that label there, the low sodium, or some other type of little graphic. We're going to look at the passageways themselves. This is what we're trying to prevent, or to the extent that we can, reverse atherosclerotic plaque, which builds up much faster when we have these inflammatory foods through the decades of our lives. They actually find the fatty streaks in 10-year-olds when they take medical imaging of their veins and arteries, and these are the precursors to atherosclerotic plaque. And here are risk factors, and I highlighted in blue the ones that we have much more direct control on a day-to-day basis of, and dietarily speaking, is what I mean by that when I highlight cholesterol. Obviously, there's a certain inherent amount of cholesterol that the body makes, and there are ranges there that are, of course, hereditary, but dietary cholesterol is strictly optional. And the amount of saturated fats that we will eat is also optional. If we start to keep score of those kind of tallies, we can do ourselves a lot of good. And I think people are inclined to keep score more so when they see these are the risk factors for that atherosclerotic plaque. So again, looking at that endothelial level, it's kind of the front line in the battle for health, I would say. It's that single cell thick, or rather single cell thin layer inside the veins and arteries, that inner layer that actually contacts the blood flow. And treating the endothelium well will definitely pay benefits. Here are some ways to give the endothelium the cofactors it needs in a nutritional sense to make more nitric oxide naturally, because your body can do that. Yes, it's a pill for heart patients. Your body makes it. and we can give it the food to make it. I've highlighted a couple things on this vast list of helpful foods. I highlight arugula just because it's highest in the cofactor aspect of making nitric oxide. The rest of the things on that row are great too, but arugula happens to be extra potent in this regard. And I highlighted beetroot rather, because it's so easy to implement, because it can be in the form of juice. You can get a bottle of it pre-made, or if you want to really get a great value on a servings per price, $21 for what I think was a 1 pound bag of beetroot juice, organic in this case, but that's 113 servings. If you do that once a day, you've bought 3 or 4 months of beetroot juice, and that's get down to, I don't know, 5 or 10 cents. I didn't bring my abacus in from the car, but it's getting pretty cheap. So we want to look at this here. And by the way, here is the secret to the riddle at the beginning here with the candies. Cocoa, not with sugar and not with added dairy and whatnot, but actually just the cacao tree, the theobromo cacao tree, and what comes out of the fruit there, the bean that is crushed when it's untreated, it's extremely healthy for you. So something as simple and as widely available as the 100% natural version there of the Hershey's is fantastic for your endothelium, as are pomegranate powder or pomegranates. The powder makes it convenient. You can mix it into so many things. And pistachios there too. And of course, I designated a low sodium because you can have things added to it that make the whole prospect kind of backfire. So I call this the endothelial trifecta. And they have results published on the American Heart Association's website about the cocoa or cacao, not quite synonyms, but you'll see them used synonymously quite a bit. As they say here, this finding is remarkable. And I would agree. In 2 weeks, you've got a roughly -5 and -3 top number, bottom number, systolic, diastolic change to your benefit in blood pressure, just from a couple of tablespoons a day, and whether that be in your oatmeal or whether that be in a little drink that you mix up or what have you. So that's pretty solid, but it's not the most potent thing that you could do in that regard. Flaxseed, ground flaxseed actually, or flaxseed meal, is even stronger at attenuating high blood pressure, says the American Heart Association and others. In a 6-month trial, they first got -10 systolic and -7 diastolic. And when it was rerun, they got -14, -8, and -14 makes it the most potent thing, singular thing on earth, including any medication that's ever been derived or disseminated at lowering blood pressure. The most potent single thing. Flaxseed meal. And I'm unaware, I haven't seen any anecdotes or any data talking about any adverse effects with medications. And the amount here is 1 tablespoon per day ground, which is why I put the little grinder on there, which kind of makes it look like we've got those at the county gift shop. The way the logo's on there, we don't even have a gift shop. Now, a lot of this math looks pretty exciting. When you're doing the hand grip exercises, oh, I'm taking garlic and I'm going to start to get some cacao in the morning and flaxseed, like, wow, 10, 20, 30, 40 possible minus points. Okay, slow down. Can't just flush it all away. Your medication can't have a precipitous withdrawal. Is something that you need to, I would say, negotiate at the doctor's office. And the way I talk about this is if you are implementing habitually lots of healthy things like beetroot juice or garlic or what have you, you're getting some exercise, and you're at the doctor's office and you get a 110/71, and your doctor says, well, looks like it's time to reduce your medication, it looks like. You could say, oh, I already have. That can happen. You're your maintenance chief. And when it boils down to it, you can make logical decisions about dialing a third off of the medication. If you've seen by your own collection of data with your blood pressure cuff and getting dizzy when you stand up because your blood pressure got so low because of all the healthful things you're doing for yourself in combination with medication you're starting not to need, you're your maintenance chief. I want to point this out as well. Pretty cool opportunity in a supplement, K2, distinct from K1 slightly. Your body will produce K2 from K1 if you get a lot of greens, beans, stuff like that, which is not particularly typical. So there is a way to accelerate that curve. You want calcification. You don't want it up top there in the veins and arteries. You do want it in the skeleton. That's where you would want to direct your calcification if you were able to do such a thing. And K2 actually helps with that. It actually activates a unique protein, MGP, that exists at that endothelial level inside your veins and arteries, and it helps to repel calcium. Calcium, which sometimes in abundance in your vascularity may be attracted to lay down on cholesterol deposits and increase the nature of that problem and that obstruction in there. MGP protein activated by K2 can help shuttle the calcium out of there and to the bones where you want it. There's a process of bone remodeling that's supposed to do that naturally, and the calcitonin will kick in when your brain senses that there's higher levels of calcium and whatnot. But we distort a lot of these symptoms and signals with the types of foods that we have and the abnormally habituated lifestyles that we find ourselves subject to. This has shown promising results for about the last 5 years. Every time I check for new data sets on this, they look pretty good. I do want to point out, however, there are 2 versions of that supplement. One of them is laboratory deduced, and one of them is actually fermented. So it's much more similar to the natto in that picture there, which is Japanese soy. That's what it occurs naturally in. And the MK7 version of K2. MK7 version is the fermented version, has better bioavailability, has a longer half-life in the body. It can engage that MGP for about 72 hours. Much, much better than the MK4. So forget I even said that. Look for MK7 if you are going to take any K2 by your own volition. So treat the endothelium with love and tenderness. When it comes to your cocoa or cacao, your beet juice, your pomegranate, your pistachios, and all those fruits and vegetables, treat the endothelium with love and tenderness. I'd rather think that would look pretty good on a monogram pillow as a reminder, perhaps. We've got those in the gift shop as well. Nutritionfacts.org. I cannot recommend that enough. Little 4 or 5 minute videos, about 2,000 of them, and indexed very well alphabetically. You can type in cholesterol, you can type in carrots, you can type in diabetes, and you're going to get an excellent list of videos to check out, as moderated, I would say, by Dr. Michael Greger, the founder of nutritionfacts.org, a absolute cornucopia of the things that I wish we would all pay attention to, I guess is how I'd say that. Quickly here, our last section tonight is implementation and looking at some ways that we can kind of get our own psychology in gear to tune those habits. This book here is really fantastic. James Clear has sold 10,000 copies of this Atomic Habits. It's probably in the library. And he would call himself very much an aggregator of psychology. He says his own contributions to this are rather limited, but he's a great aggregator. And the type of quotes that he can produce that are so bite-sized and so effective are great. Many people think they lack motivation when what they really lack is clarity. I find these things to be extremely helpful. Individual health evolution is not about willpower. It is about organization. And that last step is the icing on the cake. There is, okay, I've got more knowledge now about what kind of foods I should probably be eating. Ooh, congratulations to me. I bought some. I put them in my shopping cart. Whoops, threw them out 8 days later because they went bad. That was my cycle for 6 months until I put eat blueberries on my to-do list. You really have to do that when it's not your habit to do so. You don't look for blueberries when you're hungry unless it's on your to-do list. So your progress should be incremental. It's not a mad dash to add 53 new things or a dozen or two that we've talked about here tonight. It's picking off the most actionable 1 or 2 maybe, and revisiting that the following Tuesday night or what have you, on a weekly basis, and say, all right, well, that's going pretty good and I kind of like it. And I'm doing the hand grip exercises. Is my medication regimen that I currently have clear to add garlic? Well, you go from there. And when you compound the value of each of these things, you really start getting somewhere, and doing so slowly because it's overwhelming to do too much at once. But this progress can be driven by specific plans. And from Atomic Habits, people who make specific plans for when and where they will perform a habit are more likely to follow through. And this is borrowing from the concept of implementation intention, published in '99 by Dr. Gawitzer. I will take a walk after lunch around the block. And when you say that to yourself in the morning, it's clear. You've created clarity. And then you have to kind of betray yourself to not do it, and you don't want to. And they've shown in studies that this implementation intention works. People that'll just take the practically seconds to iron this out in advance, in the morning, the day before, what have you, help themselves exponentially more. You can take some degree of control over your environment. Behavior is a function of the person in their environment. That goes back to the stimulus control equation here from Dr. Lewin. And in that regard, what you run into at the work break room is one thing, but what you put on your own counter is another. And is it the cookies or is it the apples? You have a certain level of control over your own environment, like packing a lunch. It doesn't have to be a David Carradine Kung Fu lunchbox per se, it could be. But when you do that, the other thing, the drive-through window, is much less likely to happen because you made a plan and executed it for 5 or 10 minutes. The little choices we make each day, time magnifies the margin between success and failure. Time will multiply whatever you feed it. Good habits make time your ally. Bad habits make time your enemy, says Mr. Clear. And we can use our psychology as such an asset in changing our lifestyles to better our health. And we can imagine, as these folks in this picture are doing, they're thinking about these great days that are coming. And that can help pull you forward at the kind of goals you can envision attaining, particularly when you're starting to organize how to attain those things. But as valuable, if not more so, is the rocking chair test, where you actually spend just a few minutes alone in quiet with your eyes closed, and you envision this going the wrong way. You envision 5 years from now or what have you, having not done those things. You can picture people that you've cared about over the years that had those outcomes. And you know you have some degree or a large degree of effect on your timeline. It's valuable to, it's scary. It's affecting, it's emotional, and you only have to do it every year or two because it's so powerful. And then you combine both these ideas. You've got that positive thing pulling you forward, and you've got that scary thing chasing you from behind you. And together, those are very powerful. So again, I stress the planning. I'm going to take a walk after lunch tomorrow, for example, and planning that in advance is so very powerful. Create clarity. Take control. That is the end of this presentation, and I certainly hope to be back with boosting brain health through the Copper Queen Library and the BISB system very, very soon. Thank you very much for checking out the presentation tonight.
Thank you, Brian. Wow, jam-packed presentation. And I love all your touches of humor. And if I hadn't been muted, you would have heard me giggle.
It's always hard to gauge with Zoom, right?
Right, because we're muted. Claire, do you have any questions or comments?
Oh, I so enjoyed listening to you. I tried to get on my phone and say, everybody that I know, get on here really quick. This is going well. This is my thinking. I love it. I wish more people had heard you. And since you recorded it, I suppose some people could listen to this at some point, right, Allison?
Yes, this will go up on our YouTube channel as quickly as possible, because I agree with you. I think it was maybe the most interesting and exciting and comprehensive health presentation that I have attended. in how to really use the science and really delve into those microscopic chemical actions that are happening at that level inside our vascular and heart organ, and yet understand it for the layperson. You really covered so much, but the focus on the food, I think, is so important, especially so many of us, um, such as latchkey kids from the 80s who grew
Right.
up in the fast food nation before we knew all of this. I mean, even for me, my father was macrobiotic. My parents shopped organic. We were very health conscious, but McDonald's was the go-to, right?
Right.
It was
Right.
with kids and two working parents, and how to really acknowledge what are seemingly easy behavioral changes, but also are truly not when we have patterns, especially those quick fixes. You know, it is a lifestyle change, but I love the ending of this presentation of really
Mm.
highlighting how we change our habits, how we change our thinking, how we slow down and take a moment to be thoughtful, to meditate, to look into our interior selves about where our responsibility lies. I just appreciate that so much.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. I appreciate all this feedback so much. I thought that a psychological angle is a component that should be included in this. I think that understanding some of the science mechanistically is a valuable threat to understand. When I started to encounter some of this information and I found out that the fat and sodium in an average fast food meal, actually a small one, would reduce vascular flow by 47% for 6 hours. I thought, I can't afford that. I'm 155 over 103 today. And, and it would actually change how smelling what was wafting over from that restaurant would affect me and my behavior, to know that. So I happen to find that an explanation of these scientific concepts is something that is almost involuntarily actionable, but also to be talked to about. Here's how to slow down and get granular about how you make your day, how you can tune your habits and whatnot. I think is valuable, and I'm glad that it landed well as a reasonable and appropriate part of this presentation. And Claire, with your background, your professional background in health, I was very glad to see that you didn't skedaddle early on. And this, in fact, like, oh my goodness, let's get people to listen to this. And yes, as I understand it, and perhaps if people are hearing this, they're hearing it on YouTube because you helped share the link to it and whatnot, Claire. And that'd be great if you did, because, we all three of us here certainly want people to have the opportunity to learn how to take better care of themselves.
Well, Cochise County definitely has a rock star in the health department. And I look forward to the next one. But I actually was thinking, these blue zones, or intentional communities or cultural change, right, in a community. That I think would be a really interesting thing, ambitious, but possible in our community. And Cochise County Health Department has done these kind of programs of lifestyle changes. I think it'd be fascinating to find out if there could be a like a roadmap and a little like, let's create a blue zone. How many people want to participate?
Right. That's similar to that Minnesota miracle that AARP featured in that article. It goes back, I think, around 10 years or so. And they got some pretty impressive results. And only a small portion of the city signed up, per se. Claire, did you have a question or interjection?
Yeah. There was a health fair here. It would have been before COVID. And the Seventh-day Adventists put it on at the senior center. And I went because, it's like I wanted to hear. And I scored, of course, very high on it because I'm doing all of the things that they said. But again, it was like they're doing that, just like in Mira Mesa, was it? They're doing that.
Mhm.
And it's like, and it was just really impressive. I'm not interested in their doctrine, but they're eating cleanly and clearly. It's
Mhm.
like, wow. And so why can't we be more like that in some ways?
Right. I mean, the individuals who are in that intentional community, one of the things that they have to do is obey those rules. And we have more freedoms. So we end up buying lunch at the gas station. Of course, that's not mandatory. And the individual, if they're empowered by knowledge and then mechanizes new habits and defends those things, you have to be ready to play defense in your life against your peers and against your family, quite
You
frankly.
do. You
But
do.
you have that opportunity. Everyone has that opportunity. And it certainly starts with a knowledge base of how damaging the food supply has become, and an enhanced knowledge base of psychological ideas that could help mobilize someone. And that's why I think this presentation actually ties very well with the next one, the boosting brain health. And I certainly look forward to sharing that one with this group.
Do you know
Absolutely.
when that will be?
Hopefully in the next month or two. We have to check our schedules, but I will be putting it in the newsletter and posting it online. And I did just want to make one last comment, which I thought was interesting, the Venn diagram of the different communities and where they overlap. I think two communities overlapped in empowered women.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
I really appreciated seeing that, and how that reflects on the health of a community, how it actually matters in a community's economy, its education, its social and physical health. And seeing that as a data point was really exciting, and a reminder of the roles that we all play in our communities, whether it is as a teacher or a parent or an educator, to highlight, where are you, who are you around. In At the library, we call our public space a third space, the first space being your home, where a person spends the most time. The first space is your home, where you live, and the second space or second place is either work or school. But then after that, where you next spend the most time with other people in your community, a library can be that third space. And so how we inhabit the space that we interact with other people is where we can change our habits too, where we can bring knowledge, bring new questions, and learn together. And so I feel like this presentation really brought me to that place of, we don't have to do it alone. We can find friends to stop eating sugar with together. So if we go out to ice cream together, maybe we're
Right.
going to go out for something else, for some berries and,
Or a
change,
walk?
or a
Yeah.
walk.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And when it boils down to it, whether it be for health and nutrition, but upon reflection, sometimes we have to revise this excess list. And that can be hard when it comes to friends or even family. It's like, well, I am going to take care of myself. And every time I'm around you, that doesn't happen. So it's your fault, and I'm not going to be around you anymore. I mean, these are tough things to do, but
And
why
change is
doesn't
incremental.
yeah, exactly, incremental. But when it boils down to it, end of the day, one can reserve the right to take care of themselves and really defend their health, because that's really the posture we have to go into, at least particularly in the learning phase of how to re-navigate the scene around us.
And some of us haven't been taught that. So it's for many of us, it's not a reminder per se, but a new life skill. How do I learn to put myself first? How do I learn to take care of myself so that I
Mm,
can be there for the people that I love?
It's interesting you say that, Allison, because in the next presentation, Boosting Brain Health, I do get into a thing called the Big Five personality traits. And we talk about one trait in particular, the spectrum of agreeable and disagreeable. And when someone takes this Big Five test and finds out they're highly agreeable, that actually exposes a level of vulnerability that they have in their interpersonal dealings, very much in lieu of what you're talking about there. They
Well, I
can be
can't wait.
victimized. Yeah, it's a
That
fascinating
will be our
topic.
teaser, and hopefully we'll all get to take the test together. So thank you.
And I would even do it in person.
There you go.
Thank you,
Group
Claire.
answers.
High praise. Okay, we will talk about all that. And thank you so much for joining us at the Copper Queen Library.
My pleasure, very much so. Look forward to being back. Take care.
Have a wonderful evening. Good night.
Likewise.